I like.
It is a really beautiful office. Well, good morning. Happy Monday and good evening, I suppose, Jenny. It's a totally different time zone there. Um, it is June 17th, day after Father's Day, and we are live with Jenny Holland with us for Solid Ground this week. Um, let's see. We have a lot of interesting things to talk about, but maybe perhaps we can first do an introduction to Solid Ground. Deborah, do you want to read the blurb?
Do. Yep. I'm going to make a slight edit from the last time. It's very slight. Solid Ground is a peer support community for anyone concerned about the imposition of critical social justice and or authoritarian measures like COVID mandates in their workplace, university, children's school, or community. We offer weekly online peer support groups in which members share ideas, thoughts, and support for how to navigate the impact of these ideologies and answer the question, where do we go from here? You can join one of our groups for only $5 a month. To find out how to join our community, please visit solidgroundsupport.com. Please note, Solid Ground does not provide psychotherapy or legal advice, and nothing we do should be construed as such.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Hi, Ninja Kitty. It's nice to have you with us. And one of these days, I'll figure out how to use a different program so we can get that big zoom off the screen when we are doing these live streams. So thanks for bearing with us. Benjamin hates that I still use Zoom for these, but I'm really bad at learning new technologies. So
Yeah.
it's a process. So Jenny, you suggested you were talking about something that was really interesting, and that's all this stuff that's coming out about Hunter Biden and some of the communications that we're seeing around that, not so much from a political angle, but from just observing these interactions, especially between him and Haley. And Haley is his brother's ex-wife that he was involved with, right? Oh, widow.
Yeah, widow.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, I started following the Hunter Biden saga in early 2020, long before the laptop came into the public domain. Was around the time of, it was actually the cause of my disenchantment, to put it mildly, with the Bidens and the Democratic Party as a whole. So I've been interested in the story for a while. Last week was his trial in Delaware when he was convicted of, I think, a couple of gun charges because he lied on a form which would have allowed him to purchase a handgun, and he said that he was not an active drug user. And that was obviously a lie. And in the course of the trial, a lot of the texts from his laptop between him and Haley Biden, who is the widow of his older brother Beau, who had died a few years prior, very sadly and very young. These texts came out and became part of the prosecution, which showed him to be, in flagrant active use of crack cocaine. And even though I am deeply hostile to the Biden family, even I could not help but feel this real twinge of like human just recognition. I might not even go so far as to say sympathy, but definite recognition as someone who has been in a long-term serious relationship with an addict, and they just like brought me back in this really weird way. Megyn Kelly did a really good breakdown of them on her show last week with Viva Frei and I forget who else, and she read some of the texts out, and I was like listening to them in the car or something, and I was just like, oh my God, I was having flashbacks to this time in my life when my marriage was unraveling, and the primary reason for that was my then husband's addiction-induced breakdown, and I left him shortly thereafter. And even after I left him, actually, the text continued on for months and months and months. And there's just a particular dynamic, and I'm not sure if it would be the same with all addicts. I don't obviously know all addicts, and I'm sure there's a certain amount of variance in that very, very wide, very disparate group. But there was this push and pull dynamic in these texts where he was kind of switching from getting on his high horse, as if he had any reason to be on his high horse, with her, to this sort of like pitiful, like, woe is me, nobody understands me, like tone, which is extremely toxic. But when you're in it, when you're stuck in a serious relationship, as I was with my then husband, you have this pull of you want to help and compassion. And of course, it's, someone you love or have loved and you've built a life around, or has been in your life in an important way. And you see that person is completely out of control and suffering really, really deeply. And so you're literally trapped in this interpersonal dynamic where you're having the same fights over and over and over again. And it's like being in topsy-turvy world. It's like the most insane, crazy thing. So for example, like I actually just went back and I watched the video again, and she was reading these texts out. Again, these were submitted to the jury because Haley Biden played a pivotal role in this case because she found his gun. And she found his gun because she went looking for it because she didn't trust what he was up to. They were in a relationship at that point, and she also became a crack addict during that time of that relationship. So it was a really messed up situation. And, I know the Democrats were saying at the time, well, this is going to humanize him, and maybe, but I mean, I'm not going that far, but I do feel a certain amount of sympathy for her. But she's worried about him. She's worried about her kids being around him, and she finds this gun. So she goes in a panic and she takes the gun and she throws it in a trash can on a public street. And that's what precipitated these particular texts. And then he finds out that she's thrown his gun in a trash can, and that somehow the FBI is now involved, and he's losing his mind because he knows the world of trouble he's now in. But instead of taking any responsibility for that, instead of saying, oh God, okay, maybe this is my rock bottom, he says, this is all your fault. And he dares to call her irresponsible. He calls her insane. He calls her unhinged, and he's making all these demands that she explain herself to him. And she's then returning saying, no, but you need to go to rehab. And then sort of pleading with him, like, please call me, please come home, please check into a rehab. We love you. Your family loves you. And this is so resonant. I'm sure that millions of people would have had similar experiences, whether it's people addicted to drugs or alcohol. Just the sense of, this person is completely spiraling and completely out of control, but they somehow are so deep in their own ego that they cannot admit any of their own responsibility. And it's a one-way ticket to rock bottom. Who knows if he's even ever reached rock bottom? I mean, I have no idea. I have no way of knowing. It doesn't seem like he has, but and like the entire judicial system and political system, the apparatus is set up to prevent him from reaching rock bottom because everyone seems out to protect him, which is not going to, do him any favors as a human in the long run. But that's all by the by. It was just the exact same tone that I remember from 12 years ago. And it was just so shocking. It was so shocking to read.
I have a question for you from your perspective, what you went through in your own marriage, that dynamic of being sort of pitiful, but then the reverse of that, being on the high horse. What do you think the thought process is behind the side of the dynamic when the person's getting on their high horse?
Yeah, I think so I have quite a lot of experience in dealing with alcoholics. So I've met a variety, and they do tend to fall. There's certain ways they're very, very similar, but with this particular, with Hunter and with my first husband, who was from the US, and he went to like very well educated, very smart, kind of raised to achieve great things. A lot of care and bespoke attention in certain ways, were given to him. And he grew up in a very sort of, not wealthy, but very privileged, kind of rarefied environment. I think that a lot of the pain and the unease and the dis-ease is driven by the sense of that you are incredibly special and no one really understands you because you're so special. That's the ego. And that's and I think, I mean, why wouldn't Hunter think that? I mean, he was literally like the scion of one of the most, important political families in the United States, who didn't earn their influence with integrity. They did it through corruption, obviously. So So he would be a prime candidate. It would make sense that he would think that the sun shines out of his ass because he was never called up on any of his terrible behavior.
Although he was never Bo either. Sorry to interrupt, but like to me, I always felt like he was never Bo. He could never match up to being Bo, and I always wondered about that driving things too.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's the sense of like, well, I'm special too. I deserve. I want I want. And when that attaches then to the compulsive taking of substances, whether it's drink or drugs, it's a very, very, very difficult mindset to break. And in the case of my ex, unfortunately, it never worked, and he died recently. So, I mean, I think that unless you can find this sort of sense of humility and a sense of you're actually not that special, and addicts, whether you are the son of the vice president or you are a street drinker, you are in the same boat, and you have to really understand that and admit that you are powerless over it, and that you are the locus of control is outside yourself. I think a lot of addicts, especially high functioning ones, which my ex was, until he wasn't, they really do put a lot of emphasis on the outward trappings of success and power, or social cachet and stuff like that, so as to mask this kind of yawning emptiness inside that is what's driving their addiction. And I mean, I'm not an expert. I'm an expert only as a person who's lived and watched people go through this, people very close to me. And it is caused by I don't know if it's a trauma or if it's a deeply embedded sense of lack. So then you have this kind of ego edifice created around it to protect that gaping hole. And then you can become very aggressive, at least emotionally aggressive, in defending your little special self. It's wild to watch. And the crazy thing, so the most revealing thing to me was, when I went through this process, wasn't so much, watching my first husband kind of disintegrate before my eyes. It was how long it took me to realize what was happening and how deeply I was in denial until a long time after the fact, years after the fact. So while the ego of the part of the addict is playing this role of I'm special, I'm great, look at me, no, of course this is everyone else is crazy, it's the world that has the problem, not me. The person who's close to them, at least I was wanting to support that worldview, because I also wanted him to be special. I also wanted him to be successful. And I, most of all, didn't want to admit to myself that I was the one who was so deeply involved, who had built my life around a person who was fundamentally unstable and completely unable to be with me as a real partner when he had presented as the successful person who everyone loved. And that's very unnerving. And you can see in her text, she's saying, like, it was my stupidity for trying to help you, like, for being worried about you. And she's trying to meet him halfway by taking a certain sense of ownership over his fuck up. But that doesn't work. It doesn't work. You'll never meet them halfway. There is no halfway. There's only the extreme. And you are the one who has to then remove yourself entirely and say, okay, where was the part that I played? And then you have to deal with your own ego, which is crazy. Like, just a very, very sort of funny but sad example. I went to one Al-Anon meeting after this happened, with when I left my first husband, and I sat there. And at this, we had separated and we had moved into different countries, and I had a 4-year-old son who, I was suddenly a single mom. I didn't have a job. I was on welfare, and someone had said to me, you should go to Al-Anon. So I went to one Al-Anon meeting, and every day he was calling me like 5 times a day, and we were having these long conversations, like just like the Haley and Hunter conversations, recrimination and pathetic and crying and upset, and me trying to figure out a solution for him. Like, well, maybe you do this, you do this, you do this, and trying to appease him, and then trying to like lay down the law, and none of it was working. I was completely in this vortex. And I go to this meeting and I'm sitting there and I'm listening to this story of this man, older than me. His children were grown, but still young adults. And he was saying about how his wife had, her life this good life she had just evaporated, and she had ended up as a street person or something like that. And I remember sitting there thinking, oh, that's not me. That's not me. And I was judging him. I was like, I didn't say anything out loud, but internally I was judging him like, oh no, I'm better than that. I'm better than that. And not even a week later, I got a phone call saying that my husband was in Berlin and had been taken to a hospital, like about to stroke out from his binges. And it took me so long to realize that I was the one who was just as much in denial as he was. And I literally had the nerve to think that I was better than these other people because of the setting I was in, or because they were from a different kind of socioeconomic group than me. And, I wasn't. In fact, I was much worse off than they were because I had not allowed myself yet to see the truth in what I had done to my own life, So it's a very trippy experience. But what you have to be able to do is be humbled by your own mistakes. And if you can't do that, then you can't get better.
Sounds like, sometimes being in a comfortable setting that sort of looks good can be a distraction from the disaster that's actually taking place. Because those things, having a home, having some nice, comforting things around you sort of shores up your identity and your sense that things are stable.
Totally. And I mean, again, it's all of those outward facing things. It's the trappings, so that you think, oh, the neighbors will never know. Oh, the teachers will never know. Oh, my friends will never know. And then you're burdened with secrecy and shame. And the partner of the addict then takes on the burden of secrecy and shame. I mean, addiction is characterized by shame, right? I think it's a chicken and egg thing. I think shame precedes the addiction in most cases, but I don't know. I mean, that's just my observation. But the more you drink, the more you, the more you're in active addiction, the bigger the shame gets. But then the stakes get higher and higher for how much you have to do to cover it up. So imagine if, me and my ex were just two nobodies, falling out of the professional managerial class because of these family dynamics that were destroying our lives and our livelihoods. But, imagine what it would be like in a family like that is so famous and so wealthy and so connected and so powerful. They have literally every single thing to lose. They have every single thing to lose. I mean, it's like Shakespearean. It's if you put it in a made for TV after school special, you would think, oh, this is a little too on the nose, which doesn't excuse it, by the way. Like, very, very strongly need to state that. Like, it doesn't excuse it in any way. And no addict, even with the worst family backgrounds, which I would not be surprised at all if Hunter Biden and his siblings had truly terrible childhoods. Being rich and privileged does not mean you were happy in any way, but none of that excuses adult behavior at the end of the day. And that's what I think something like AA teaches you, is you have to take full accountability of the harms you have done. And you can't blame your parents, and you can't blame your partners, and you can't blame your whatever abuse you've suffered. You have to take the responsibility for the mess that you created, which, I mean, I suppose it's only guesswork, but I would guess that Hunter has not done that.
Well, and it's so hard for loved ones to know what their role is. I mean, how do you support, how do you help without enabling and protecting someone from the negative consequences that they would experience from their own behavior? And so much enabling just continues to perpetuate the cycle. It's really difficult for loved ones to know what their role is.
Yeah. It's really
go ahead.
No, go on, Deborah, please.
No, I have something that wants to go a little meta, but I don't want to jump out of things that are a little more personal too soon.
No.
So I'd rather
go ahead.
Because I'm just sitting here thinking, like, isn't it really, whether we want to say Dems or progressives, like there's an addictive enabling essentially of how are we dealing with the people who are addicted, or how are we dealing with the homeless, or how are we dealing with whatever. And on some level, this is probably not a new thought, but I was just sitting here, it was just hitting me, like there's that way that we want to be the caring ones. We want to be, of course I care about you. And then being in denial about what we're doing and trying to help. I'm saying we, like having been on that side, like not even seeing that what we're doing is maybe making it worse. We're certainly not letting it hit bottom. And so I don't know, somehow as you spoke about that very personally, I just was suddenly I was in touch with this more collective enabling that we're doing, or the society's doing, or whoever's doing.
I mean, I think there's an argument to be made that the addict codependent dynamic has become the blueprint for all of society. And it's not entirely just the progressives that have taken up all the wrong lessons from that dynamic. I think conservatives fail to account for, especially when it comes to married couples, if the man is an addict, or even if the other isn't. People who are like, never get divorced. Divorce is so harmful. Okay, yeah, sure. Divorce is terrible. I've been divorced. It's really terrible. But to answer your question, Leslie, to address your point, there is no good option if you are trapped with an addict. You the probably in most cases the best option is to leave. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people don't admit, and I really do need to go back to Al-Anon actually, because I would like to know how people manage the people who, from my limited understanding of this, the people who do make it work. If you can stay in a relationship with an active drinker or addict, you have to really detach from them. But that's really impossible to do if you're still married, especially if you have children. You have to protect them from the harms of that. And the harms of that are so grave that the harm of divorce is a lesser evil. And I do find it a little tiresome when conservatives are like, blah, 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 divorce. I mean, it's terrible, but they're trying to build a stable and safe family with an addict at its center is like wrestling a wet, seal. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
No, and they can place you and the kids in all kinds of danger, because the addiction doesn't just stay restricted to a little narrow aspect of life.
Yes.
You get impulsive, destructive behavior with poor judgment across multiple domains until destruction is just seeping into every aspect of life.
Yes.
And I think you can also really lose yourself in the process, because with that dynamic that you were describing earlier, the pitiful, which ropes you in if you're an empathetic person and you love your partner, but then the moral high horse and maybe some blaming, and you're maybe you get caught in trying to reason with that person, but you are not reasoning with a person who is in touch with reality. And so you yourself can start to spiral. Mm-hmm. And then you're in this dance where now you're getting swept into a destructive vortex of emotion, which makes you less vital, less available to your kids, less available and functional to the other aspects of your life. So it's so destructive.
Yeah, it is. And it's also progressive. So it only gets worse.
Yeah.
And it ends in two places. It ends in death or it ends in recovery. Like there's no, I learned to not drink so much, or I learned to only take crack once at Christmas. Or whatever. Like that doesn't happen. Okay. Like it doesn't happen. It's one or the other. And I've seen this I've seen this in other people, not just, the people I married, like I've seen it in other people. It does not get better. It's really, you have to get out. You have to protect children from that. And the choices are only hard. But I think, Deborah, you're right. I think that the sense of empathy and the sense of, I can fix this. And the sense of like, the problems are external. He's only drinking because he's stressed out at work. It's like, they're only, certain groups only do poorly at school because of systemic racism. Like, no, fundamentally, whether or not systemic racism is true, and you can have a fair debate about that, I guess, but whether or not that's true, that doesn't mean that for an individual child, it's impossible for that person to achieve. It doesn't mean that at all. Like fundamentally, and liberals really hate this, and progressives really hate when I say this. And people get mad. Like I've had men send me hate mail about this. Like men, I'm like, grow a pair. Like, you're so mean. But I'm like, fundamentally, you are the only person ultimately responsible for your life once you hit a certain age.
Absolutely.
And even with the worst childhood backgrounds, you can overcome that if you are blessed with the kind of spirit that can move forward. And I don't know how you get that, by the way. I don't know how you get to that part. I don't know where that comes from.
No,
but
it's even if it's not your fault, it still
No,
becomes your
exactly.
responsibility.
It's still, that's right. And if you are creating destruction to everybody around you, there may be some people that try to help you, but if they start getting hurt, then it's their responsibility to remove themselves and get out of your destructive path.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Devin says in the chat, says, I'm a piece of shit the world revolves around, is an AA-ism. I like that. That really sums up something really well that you said earlier.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's funny.
You know, I don't know. I don't have personal experience with a lot of forms of addiction, but my ex-husband was a sex addict. He was a porn and sex addict.
I would say that's absolutely the same. No,
that's a controversial topic because some people don't want the process addictions like sex, porn, gambling don't fit the substance abuse model, but there's a lot of similarity. And I saw this happen with him. I saw this spiral out of control. When I first found out about it, I uncovered this heap of just never ending discoveries about what he had been doing, and really unsavory, just really shocking stuff. And here I was, a mom with a new baby. And I left, and over the next year, we went through I see our relationship played out in those text exchanges like you're talking about. I can see that dynamic playing out looking back at that. And it was, I mean, all of this resonates a lot with my own experience with a different form of addiction.
Yeah. It's funny because I think I know we've talked about this before, and also I've probably mentioned before ages ago this interview that Isabella Malbin did with a woman who's lost her husband to sissy hypnoporn. And her description of that was that he's just started out with regular porn. And that very much reminded me of the same addiction process where, well, I only drink on weekends. Oh, I only have a little bit of wine. And then, you put all these like curtailments there that just stop working, and then you just kind of like move the goalposts every time, and you end up in more extreme behaviors. I mean, that sounds to me with porn much like it does with addicts of drugs and alcohol. So I take your point that maybe it's controversial, but at least in that one bit, that's totally has overlap between the two.
And that's one of the reasons I've spent so much time talking about this pornography issue, is that I discovered so much in that time when it was revealed to me what was going on just behind in my own home that I didn't know about. And since then have spoken with so many people who've uncovered the same thing, and people who have come forward and said, you see like so many people reporting this issue. And one of the things with pornography that seems to really adhere to the addiction model is that escalation, that it will escalate into greater use, more extreme forms, and often into acting out in real life, hookups and prostitution and things like this. So, and
the numbing effect of the mode. So the numbing effect of drugs or alcohol, the numbing effect of porn, that's another similarity. But that, when you say that, Leslie, like it's going on in my own home and I didn't even know. I mean, I could see how you wouldn't know, your husband's search history, but like, I watched my husband's drinking problem escalate with my own eyes, and I still didn't see it. Like, it's incredible how you can be the closest you can ever be to someone and not realize, and what the full depths of this problem, the full depths of the depravity. Like, that is such an unsettling realization when you're confronted with the truth and you're like, how did I miss this? How did I miss this? How did I miss this?
I think you miss it because you're making an effort to place the preservation of the relationship and supporting your partner as the highest priority. And in doing that, you lose a piece of your own objectivity. And in a way, it's functional because it's keeping you in that, and maybe you want to be in that for a while. But then it's also the ticket into a trip down denial river.
Yeah. I mean, I personally think that denial is the strongest human emotions. Is denial an emotion? The human
Defense
behaviors.
mechanism. Yeah, it's a defense mechanism. I think it is too, because I mean, I have seen perfectly reasonable, intelligent people be in a level of denial over something in their life that borders on the delusional in the absence of any other little pockets of psychosis. Everything else in their life, they'll be 100% reality based and have a good assessment of what's going on in that one area. They can
Yeah.
be in delusional levels of denial. It's really
does-
interesting how our brains work.
And doesn't that sound like politics?
Well, that's why I'm wondering about the compassion piece, right? So, I mean, there's these multiple things. There's maybe not wanting to lose your relationship, but like this place and where maybe we were talking earlier about the feminine going into overdrive, like where we go, I need to be compassionate. There's a suffering person in front of me, right? And I like, how do I have to be in relation to that? I shouldn't be chiding them, or I need to, whatever this, like, oh, kind of vibe.
Manage.
And and how it seems if someone's suffering, like oh my God, how could I possibly be harsh on them or something?
Well, and also
cruel.
Yeah.
And also they so often really want to change their behavior, and you really want to believe them. You really want to believe that they can.
Yeah.
Because they desperately want to change on some level. And on another level, they really want to cling to the thing that's been their crutch.
Yeah. 100%.
So they just don't have the willpower to let it go. And if you love this person, and like you said, Jenny, if you've built your life around them as the center, then you're so invested. And Benjamin and I were just talking about something related to this the other day. And he said, how does this relate to the sunk cost fallacy? And so, like I've already put so much in.
Oh, the sunk,
sunk cost. Yeah. So, and I think about that from the perspective of the loved one, especially if you're talking about a husband or wife.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. It's so, it's very, very hard to know where where you just can't take it anymore. And it's hard. It's also then hard to judge, people whose tolerance might, in my view, might be too high, for someone's behavior. It is very personal to each family and each relationship dynamic. But ultimately it only goes in one direction. And I do think that, it's funny because we also live in a society where everything seems to revolve around mental health, apparently. And yet everyone's all out of their damn mind. Like, how is that possible? We're all constantly talking about wellness and, like feeling
and we've
good
never
and
been more screwed up.
self-esteem. And we're just so out of touch with our own failings. It's completely topsy-turvy. And
I think what's happening is people are living by feelings instead of by their most deeply held values. And I think that leaning into, hey, this is what I believe, this is what I think is important, this is the person I want to be, can be a much better guide for us than following, the never-ending waves of emotions.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I think what society does now is talk all the time about feelings and never about morals.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point.
And that's a disaster.
It's a disaster.
And there's such a desire not to moralize. I mean, you get shamed up the wazoo for moralizing. It's like, that's not okay, right?
People are doing it.
I know that sounds contradictory. Yeah. But it's like there's a scientific moralism now that's data driven. It's about averages and data and studies and
dystopian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which doesn't seem to
compassion has to be balanced with, I think, values and responsibility. And there's nothing that's not compassionate about having boundaries.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right.
And in that Eric Kaufmann interview with Jordan Peterson, or maybe it was an article he wrote, there's two things I was looking at recently. He talked about, it was the compassion and the fairness. And I think he was saying most people actually, we're better to do things on the basis of assessing if things are fair than assessing if things are compassionate in terms of
I
making
agree.
evaluations or
Yeah, I
decisions.
completely agree. Because also
So
your
interesting.
compassion can be hijacked so easily, and fairness seems more cut and dry to me,
Yeah.
although it's obviously not, because we've lost all sense of fairness in society, it seems to me. But we've certainly I mean, my personal opinion is that we are all, especially women, especially Western women with third level degrees and yada yada, we have been the targets of a very sophisticated psyop, psychological warfare. And I don't really care if that makes people think I sound like a conspiracy theorist. I literally don't care, because I see evidence of it every time I open Instagram, and I see people emoting on behalf of, a population that they have known nothing about, a geopolitical war that they know nothing about, and they're freaking the fuck out because of something, because they're being fed these images that are upsetting, and they're letting it's just a process that's just taking over. It's very weird. So compassion is, I think, kind of unreliable. It's a good metric to have when you're dealing one-on-one with a person in front of you. But when it comes to the macro issues, no, compassion is for the house, maybe for the neighborhood. That's it.
Well, yeah, it's kind of meaningless once it becomes distilled down to data and averages and this utilitarianism. What is utilitarian compassion? What is that?
That sounds really creepy.
Yeah, doesn't it?
Yeah,
doesn't it?
It does.
Well, it's
Yeah.
interesting that you say women are the focus of a psyop. I think that I'd like to hear you say a little bit more of that. And I will say, Deborah, you brought up that Jordan Peterson, Eric Kaufmann interview, and I really found that very interesting. And the part that stood out to me most was, and there were several parts that stood out. I was not familiar with Eric Kaufmann before, and I want to hear more of him and read more of him. Jordan Peterson frequently brings up this idea that right now a lot of the woke problems with our culture, the problems with woke culture, are represented by a female dominance of institutions, and that there's this, he brings up this archetype of the devouring mother, and this female archetype that's kind of gone power hungry, and in the name of compassion and misplaced maternal instinct is trying to overmother and micromanage everybody all to hell. And I think that it's interesting. I like that the archetypal thinking is really interesting to me, and it rings true to some extent to me. And yet I also have to ask, what is going on at the same time that absents men from this picture? What is happening? If there is a female overrepresentation, then also there must be a male underrepresentation. And what is happening to throw us out of balance there? I don't think the answer is just to vilify women and say women are doing it wrong. Look at these women, they've taken over, and there's this craziness because of this matriarchal whatever. I think that we also have to ask what's going on with men at the same time. And we do see more women in college, more women represented in a lot of the liberal arts fields, but what's going on to pull men out? And of course I come back to what I've been uncovering over the last 15 years is this massive effects of pornography on our culture. But I know that that's just one aspect, that's just one thing. But when you change sexual dynamics between people, you change so much about the way culture functions. And so anyway, some thoughts I've been having around that, but I'm interested in your PSYOP thesis, Jenny.
Oops. now I have to invent one on the fly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. I basically, everything you just said, I agree with. I understand Jordan Peterson's concept, and I think there's a lot to it, but it's a little too conceptual and not granular enough. And like you say, it's such a good point when you say if females are overrepresented, then men are underrepresented, and why is that? And why aren't they stepping into their power? Maybe we don't want that too much. No, I'm kidding. I think everyone's being subjected to a psyop. Social media is one big psyop. We don't have an independent journal we don't have an independent media. We do, but they're not the the anointed media that still some people seem to trust for some reason. So we're all subjected to this weapons grade propaganda at all times. And I mean, Robert Malone's written a lot about that. Very interestingly, it's fourth generation warfare. There's a lot of real experts out there that are easy enough to find, and I'm certainly not one of them. But I think that the sort of cultural shift toward what was thought to be egalitarianism post sexual revolution threw off some really unintended, or maybe not, but unforeseen consequences in a disruption of that male-female balance. I think that the micromanagement and the devouring mother, that is very true. I strongly agree with that. But I also take your point that men are feeding themselves elsewhere. I think I've said this before, and I think you said, Jordan Peterson said it. Women are the moral arbiters. Women are the moral gatekeepers. Women are the gatekeepers to sex. Women are the gatekeeper, or they were. Women are the gatekeepers to how children are raised. So I was never into the feminist sort of notion of patriarchy, even though like patriarchy is similar. It's a concept that I understand and has some truth to it, but it's not granular enough. So women have always performed that function in society, and they still do in traditional societies. Like, women enforce the moral code, not men. Men might enforce it outside the home, but women enforce it in the home. So women can be extremely cruel to their own family members and their daughters and their daughters-in-law and whatever. So it's not what feminists claim it is. But with the reordering of this egalitarian notion of sexual gratification and access to sex, is it possible that men have just, well, fine, we don't have to make compromises with you anymore, because we can just go get it somewhere else, and you can just crack on with whatever nonsense you want to crack on with? I mean, is that oversimplifying it?
No, that's really interesting. That's really fascinating. And what you said about women as the enforcers of moral order, it lines up with what Kaufmann was saying in that discussion, where he said that that this isn't just women are more progressive, women are more liberal. This is women are the ones who tend to uphold the moral order of a time. And he points to studies that show that women were previously used to pull more conservative than men. And that didn't really switch until around 2004, I think he said. And so something started to change. Go ahead, Deborah.
I still think women drive some. He made it sound like there's just this order and then women just hold it up. But think about there were early female abolitionists. There were the temperance movement. Like, men were not saying it's good to be temperate. Now some women are just going to uphold it. I mean, women pushed that. I mean, they had good reason. But at least at the time it seemed like. So I don't know if they're always just. It seems like women could drive some things, not.
Oh yeah, sorry, you're right. No,
and I'm not saying you said that. It's like, I think it was more Eric said that. That's where I'm kind of clarifying.
But actually, no, that's a good point, because there's a nuance there that I didn't really They enforce the moral order, but they also drive moral change. So the suffragettes. There's this incredible and forgotten story about certain types of suffragette who were. The white flowers. They would go to meetings and churches and stuff, and basically shame some of the young men there for not enlisting in World War One, and they would bring them social ostracism because they thought they were cowards for not signing up to be blown to bits on a landmine in France. And that was women doing that. It was like middle class progressive women who were shaming these young men who were trying desperately to avoid the war that would probably kill them. And of course, women were active abolitionists. Women have always been politically active. Women have always been at the forefront of social justice movements. I mean, they have. Even in the old days, and when it was all sort of nobility and families intermarrying, women played that game. Women are power players. Women have been power players since time immemorial. But what's interesting to me is what Leslie said, what's caused the men to recede into the background. Or maybe you could make an argument that they haven't receded fully. Maybe normie men and the sort of the middle, the normal men who aren't already pulling the levers of power have receded into the background. But then now we see how hugely detrimental that is to society as a whole, because we need both. We need both. We need to moderate each other.
Ninja
Right?
Kitty says men
Sorry,
have listened. Okay. Men have listened to the demand that they abandon masculinity to be in touch with feelings and become beta who watch OnlyFans and don't date. And this is something that I think that this actually comes close to something I've been thinking about, which is what centralization of power does. I think centralization of power has the effect of creating only certain spaces for men to be agents of any kind of power. So it actually creates when you centralize, you've got fewer alphas and more betas. So you've got, very few people who have a sense of a lot of agency in their lives. And so it leaves, I think a lot of people, anyway, this kind of goes back to the whole PSYOP thing, I suppose.
Well,
but
so just investments. I mean, investments in girls financially, right? It was like, we're going to women in STEM and this scholarship and this, not that the women shouldn't have gotten it, but like at a certain point, it was like, I don't know if guys could get anything like that anymore. And you could argue, well, they had it for millennia, so now the women should get it all. But it was like there were active public policy measures to get more women into these different places, to with affirmative action, like, potentially, because that somehow is stretching to women too, like hire more women. And so there were sort of something got policyized, in one way or another. So that's a piece of it. Now you're saying, Leslie, but why didn't some men step up and just say, well, hey, wait a minute, and I don't know whether that HR scary woman.
Well, I think that they're disenfranchised to some extent by a system that does. I mean, you look at men, you look at boys, for instance, look at the whole kindergarten classroom and the overdiagnosis of ADHD. Like when I was a kid and when you guys were kids, I'm sure kindergarten was a place where you played a lot of games. You ran around and played, and you had different centers maybe, and maybe you did a song and like some ABCs, but now kindergarten is desk work.
Wow.
Kindergarten is sitting in a desk all day long with a 20-minute recess where I live anyway. This is what my son, I tried kindergarten. This is why I homeschool. We tried it. It is desk work with raise your hand and be silent and don't talk to the other kids around you and do your worksheets and get your centers, and you get a 20-minute recess. And if you finish your lunch early, you can go out for a little bit too, for like 8 minutes on the playground. So it's a very different thing. And I purposely took my older son, he's really bright, but I put him in at 6 instead of 5 because I thought there's no way he's going to be capable of sitting in that desk for that long. And so we've been talking about this for years, how bad our early education is for boys, how much it stifles their energy and their need to move. And I mean, it's bad for girls too. It's bad for everybody, I think, but it's really bad for boys. And so I think that there is a systematic, and I don't know if it's just emergent or if it's somebody's plan, but there is a systematic repression of masculinity and of men. And I think that this is happening simultaneously. We're not representing good ways to be a man. We're not. I mean, we're giving this crazy, like wholesale anything goes sexual thing. That's like bait for the worst parts of our humanity, especially people who have really high sex drives, most of whom are men. I mean, men are overrepresented in the people with really high sex drives. So you put that out there. And I think that we're messing with people's minds by using the system that we're using. Plus the teachings about feminism right now, I didn't get this really heavily when I was in college, but my daughter, who's now 26, when she was in college, they talked about, she did feminist studies. she became terrified of men and angry about men for a little while. She hated being a woman. This was like this, it's simultaneously really empowering to be a woman, and also you're resentful that you had to be a woman. Why did I have to be a woman when we get such garbage from society and men are getting blah, blah, blah. So this was the stuff that she was pumped full of during this time. She had to kind of deprogram herself from this stuff that she was studying. But yeah, when you talk about a psyop, and I don't know how to define this, because I don't know that I picture somebody like pulling the levers, or if it's just that as we become dysfunctional, we become more and more dysfunctional. But we certainly are creating a society that encourages the worst in both men and women.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Andrew Joyner sends a super chat. Thank you so much. £3.
Aw.
Super chat for the rant, I suppose.
Yeah, I think I think the psyop idea is that, you know, people know there's so much knowledge on how the human psyche and human emotions and the human mind works, that if you have malintent, you can get in there and create realities that suit your nefarious ends. And, you know, after everything we've been through with COVID and, oh my God, everything, Twitter and everything we know about the goings on before Musk bought X and whatever, I don't think that's no longer a wacky idea that might have happened. I think, in fact, I'm sure there's plenty of people who know for a fact that it has, and I just can't call them to mind right now. But I think the idea that we are encouraging people to be their absolute worst is so true. And it's especially true in the States. I don't see it as much here, actually. Maybe because I live in, Northern Ireland it's not conservative. Like, there's no conservative party. And I don't mean politically, I just mean socially. People are quite modest and reserved. And, you know, America is this place of hopes and dreams, and you can do anything you want. And it turns out that made everyone stark raving mad. It seems, in terms of, at least in the public sphere, with how people present themselves outwardly. If there's no checks within society, or actually not even within society, within yourself or within your family, if there's no checks on what you can do, then everything, the wheels are going to come off. And what I keep thinking about is that the woke problem, you know, the social justice problem, the DEI problem, the CRT problem, isn't that, and this, I think the Israel-Palestine thing is what showed me this, and I'm still trying to formulate it and make it robust, so I'm kind of talking at the top of my head, but it showed me that actually what happened, but it's not that social justice is actually, I mean, it is actually important. I think a lot of people on the right and the smart right, the intellectual right, get frustrated because when you defend Israel and you defend Jews from campus protests and stuff like that, you get accused of being an identitarian because, you know, you're just defending one special group, just like, you know, people were defending Black women or whatever. It was like one special group. But I think it takes the justice out of social justice, and it pegs virtue to very fleeting and shallow categories. And it kind of results in this demonic inversion where you end up defending bad behavior. And I'm not saying that, you know, I'm not trying to connect bad behavior with like poor Black educational attainment in public schools and stuff like that. It's more complicated than that. But you're taking, when you try and create equity of outcome or equality of outcome, you are implicitly saying that whatever that group is, gays, lesbians, girls, trans people, Black people, any of these identity subgroups, if they're not getting the same exact thing that everyone else is getting, and you're just going to give it to them, you are implicitly condoning, and you're implicitly saying they can do whatever the hell they want, and they're still going to get rewarded.
Yeah, no accountability. Yeah.
That everybody ends up in the same place. Remember that Kamala Harris ad a few years ago with the little people going up the mountain And she was defining equity, and she said very clearly that equity does not mean equal opportunities.
Yeah.
Equity means everybody ends up in the same place. So the person that studied like an absolute fiend and had virtually no social life so they could get into an excellent school, they should end up in the same place as somebody who did not do any of that.
Right.
And that is just not how life works in any category. That's like saying you should never exercise, but you should have, you know, Schwarzenegger's body or something. That's not how life works. That's not how the world is set up.
Right. It takes all the fairness out of it. So it's going back to this idea of compassion versus fairness. The way social justice is presented and the way it's been, you know, so enthusiastically adopted by the left and the progressives, is it doesn't matter about fairness. We are going to force the outcome at no matter what cost. And the first cost, of course, is to fairness. So yeah, but that's not to say that justice isn't important. Of course, justice is, and that's not to say that there are certain categories of people that require or that, you know, are due a sort of more nuanced comprehension, or maybe even special treatment sometimes. I don't know. I mean, I don't like saying it like that when I put it that bluntly. But if your preordained outcome is equity of opportunity, you are going to trample over so much fairness and people's rights. That is inevitable. You can't obtain it otherwise.
Mm-hmm. You lose the individual in the process.
You lose the individual in the process. And because that's become the norm, and it's become the norm, not organically. So that's the other thing, which is slightly, which is lacking in Peterson's formulation. I don't think this happened organically. I think it is, like you said, your daughter was taught this in school. You know, she went to college expecting to get an education. Instead, she was literally brainwashed with lies.
Yeah.
So this is not like women, because we're so nurturing and we're so controlling, although we can be both of those things. And I've seen it many, many times. And that's why women are so good at HR, or bad, depending on how you look at it. You know, it's not like we didn't lick it off the grass, as they say here in Ireland. You know, we did. You know, it was something that we were actively taught, or at least like younger people have actively been taught. And the question is why and by whom and to what end. So
I want to clear. Oh, sorry, keep interrupting.
No, go on. No, I'm done. Yeah.
No, I want to clarify, because he said he kind of went off with that childless women, but like the 4 things they found in their actual research about what would be predictive of politically correct authoritarianism were either being female, or having feminine traits, or having low verbal ability, or having taken at least one course in college that was like critical, whateverly inflected. So so he didn't necessarily say it had to be, but it seems like high options were traits or being a woman.
And it seems like that goes along if you have low verbal intelligence, you know, so you're going to be a low information, emotionally reactive person. Then and you happen to be the person, and you happen to be also of the category of people who are targeted by this information. Like Andrew Joyner says, for a while there was that inherent contradiction in feminism that women are empowered and inherent victims at the same time. And so that's the thing that my daughter was being taught with. That's the thing that was making her feel crazy. She went through a depression at that point and had a really hard time because she thought, oh, she's in school, she found philosophy, she's so interested, and then she starts going into feminist philosophy and she starts getting filled with this stuff. And it is that contradiction. It's like I am woman, hear me roar, but also I am terrified I've got to start carrying mace and all men want to rape me. You know, so if you're the person, if you're taking these classes and you're a low information person and you happen to be of the ilk that is being targeted by the ideology, it makes a lot of sense that you'd be the ones to take it up.
They're teaching that addiction split. I mean, they're teaching the thing you were talking about, Jenny, in the first place. I am a victim and I am empowered.
Yeah,
they're teaching it.
Exactly. No, that's the blueprint. The addiction enabler mindset is the blueprint for all of social justice. And no wonder it's coming out so badly. I mean, but that's the thing, that like when you imagine, like you go to college and you find philosophy, say, I've never been when I was at school, I didn't like philosophy, but I loved literature. You find these thinkers and these writers and these artists or these scientists, whatever. You find like these bodies of truth and these bodies of expression of truth in really articulate and elegant and beautiful ways, and that the absolute joy that brings. And it's not even joy like fun; it's deeper than that. It's like calming and it's inspirational. And instead of that, you're getting this demoralization, mind fuckery, which is lies. And this is what I'm talking about. It is demonic inversion of social relations and justice. That's what social justice is. It's a demonic inversion of social relations and justice. And it's really, I just feel for young people who've known nothing else. And it's very hard to break out of that, especially if you're talking about the kind of people who have those sort of average, sounds is that bad? I don't mean to say that in a judgy way, but just like genuinely sort of normal capability. How can what do we do to help those people? Nothing. I'm not going to do anything to help those people. It's not my business, really. I'm going back to, I'm already going into my enabler mode. Like, how can we help them? We don't help them. They have to figure it out on their own.
Radical responsibility for self.
Yeah. It's really, it was so effective in demolishing all of what, like, at least in the West, how we always understood fairness, at least for the last couple 100 years, and responsibility and humility again, and morals. I mean, all of that is gone. It was targeted, and it was taken out of the academy, and it was taken out of schools. It was taken out of child rearing. So parents don't enforce these lessons anymore. The parents don't pass these lessons anymore as norms. I don't think this has ever really happened before. I'm always wary of saying this has never happened before, because usually something like women have always been hoes. Okay, like the conservative idea that there's never been that, like, women used to be chaste, but now everyone's a hoe. That's a lie. That's nonsense. That's like very naive. That's like, it's like a little, like, virgin boys who are like really trying to make themselves feel better. That's not the case. There's always been women who have engaged in extreme promiscuity and deviance and all that. And there's always been divorces, and there's always been affairs, all of that. But this reordering of how we perceive the basic relations and what is fair and what is just, I don't know if that's ever happened before. I can't think of any time where we have, except maybe during Stalin and Mao.
Well, I hope we can have another conversation soon and call it "Women Have Always Been Hoes." That would be interesting. That would make for some mighty interesting conversation.
And then, like, asterisk, you say that like it's a bad thing.
Oh, wow. Well, this has been a really great conversation. Jenny, I'm so glad you joined us today. And
I'm so glad to be back. It's been a long time.
I'm so glad. And thank you to everybody who was in the chat with us. We'll be back next Monday. And if you enjoy wide-ranging, interesting conversations, join us at Solid Ground. You're always welcome to join solidgroundsupport.com. And we'll see you guys next week.
Bye, guys.